And you can keep your poster boards, your cereal boxes, and your dioramas. I don't want them. Hey everyone, welcome back to the car. Today I want to talk about SSR, which stands for Sustained Silent Reading. It is a common practice in a lot of our classrooms, but I just thought I'd make a video talking about some of the nuts and bolts about how I run my program and what a book talk looks like in my world, because that's a question I get sometimes over on the blog. So if you've been reading the blog or watching some of my videos, you know that I use something called SSR Fridays. So back when I began teaching, that's when California released its own state standards. This was way before the Common Core. And part of the California state standards was that they wanted high school underclassmen to be reading 1 million voluntary words a year. And they wanted upperclassmen, by the time seniors were about to graduate, to voluntarily be interacting with 2 million words of text a year. So one of the ways to get that many words into our kids' brains is through voluntary reading, pleasure reading, SSR, a book that they choose, something high interest for them, for fun, that they can just dive into and enjoy, because we want to make lifelong readers, because it'll bring so much value and joy to their lives. So my department jumped full board into SSR, and most of the teachers were doing 10 minutes a day for the 5 days a week, so 50 minutes a week, and they would do it either at the beginning of class as the class warm-up, as the bell ringer while the teacher was taking attendance, or they would save it and do it for the last 10 minutes of class as a sponge activity while the teacher was kind of wrapping up and getting ready for the next class. The kids would grab their books and read. I never liked that approach, and so, because I have a little chutzpah, I decided, well, in my world, I was going to take those 10-minute chunks and just put them all in one day at the end of the week on Fridays. So I've lived my professional life with the motto that it's easier to beg forgiveness than ask permission. So I just went ahead and did that, and it was a huge success for me. And then many of the other freshman team teachers started doing the same thing. So we took those 45 to 50 minutes and just put it all on Fridays for SSR Fridays. I like it because it helps develop reading stamina, right? Kids are like interacting with text for a longer, really like falling into it and building that attention span. I've talked in other videos about how I like it for classroom management. It gives one-on-one time for me to counsel and conference with students, either about writing issues or, grammar remediation, or maybe just checking in with kids when I don't have time in the ebb and flow of the regular day on Monday through Thursday. Fridays is when I can get caught up with everybody. So I love it for that. I hate book reports. I tried it early in my career where the kids would do the old-fashioned book report where, they stand up in front of the class and they do and if you want to know more about this book, you should read it. And you're like, oh my gosh, what a terrible way to spend a week. With classes of 34 kids, you're going to be a week listening to these really, really, really bad speeches. So when we do speeches, it's on topics of high interest that I want to hear about if I've got to evaluate all those. So I don't do book reports in the traditional way. And I know there's lots of projects where you take a tissue box and you do all this different stuff with it, or these paper crafts. And that's just not me. So I just want to talk about books, and I just want to get to know my kids and have them tell me about their books. So book talks have been the thing that have worked for me for couple decades now. Basically, when a kid finishes a book, he says, "Hey, yo, Randazzo, I'm ready to talk about a book." And so we just sit down and one-on-one talk about it. So sometimes teachers are like, that sounds great, but how do you manage that? And I've learned over the years some tricks that I want to share with you today to make it work for you. So early on, I did them after school. And this was before I had kids. I was the yearbook advisor back then, and I had plenty of time, and it was no big deal if kids swung by after school and did their book talks with me. But once I had kids and I had to get out of there to pick them up at, daycare or kindergarten or, now high school, I can't hang out after school for just long periods of time. And I had a couple of gnarly times when it was a deadline day and so many kids had procrastinated that the line to give a book talk to me was down the hallway, out the doors, onto the quad. And I'm just grouchy then. I'm mad at the kids for waiting till deadline day. And it's like dessert, right? A book talk is lovely, and I love to have a little bit of dessert, but I don't want a buffet of chocolate, souffle, a buffet of souffle. I don't want that. I want like one serving, maybe two servings if I'm feeling indulgent, but that's enough for a day. So I have learned to give my kids deadlines that work for me. So I divvy it up and I actually take a class of, say I've got 30 kids just to keep the math easy. I will do 10 alphabetical by last name, break them up into 3 groups, A through H, I through P, Q through Z. I think I did that right. So I'll just do that by their last names, looking at my roster to make 3 even groups. And then the 3 Fridays leading up to the end of the 9 weeks, that's when we do book talks. Book talks are pretty much done in class these days with me. During SSR, everybody's reading, and then very quietly, one-on-one at my desk, I'm having a discussion with the kid who has finished a book and wants to record it. Sometimes I'll do before school, brunch, lunch. I don't like to give up my lunch periods. I know it sounds really selfish. I used to give every minute, and my room was always open, but I gotta pee. Like, I'm just gonna keep it real. Like, and if I don't get to go pee during lunch, it is a long, miserable afternoon. So I just need to eat my lunch, and I just need to get out of my room and go sit in the sunshine sometimes. So I will do book talks if there's no other time, but generally I like to try to get them done in class. Also, leading up to the book talks, I'm creative with my scheduling of my core class. So the stuff that we're doing, hopefully I can do things that are more independent driven. So I might give kids, hey, listen to this really cool podcast, answer these questions, and then we're going to come back together for the last 10 minutes of class to talk about it. So the podcast, let's say, is a half an hour. It takes them 10 minutes to write out their short answers. That gives me 40 minutes, close to an SSR deadline or even on an SSR deadline for book talks, to meet individually with kids while everybody else is busy working. Or I'll do, let's view this documentary, Billions and Change, I've used for a couple of years now. It's really great. It's a free, I want to say it's like 40 or 45-minute documentary. It's on YouTube. I'll put a little link down there. And then I have some questions that go with it. And then the next day we'll talk about it in class. But that gives me almost an entire class period. I can set my desk up, have a little lamp while the film is being projected up on the board. I can meet privately with individuals and we just talk privately about the books. So find ways to make the time work for you, because it has to work for you or it's not going to be sustainable. So I realized after school book talks, kids will wait till deadline. They will procrastinate. Even if they finish a book, they sometimes just wait till the deadline anyway. And I'm like, you finished this book 3 weeks ago. Why didn't you come in then? So you kind of have to nag them. You kind of have to stay on top of them, that sort of thing, because they're kids. And in 20 years, I haven't figured out how to make all teenagers stop procrastinating. That's just a thing they do. Okay, so you're probably wondering, well, that's great, but what if I haven't read the books? Well, teacher friends, I have not read all of the books that my kids have read. I'd say maybe I've read 20% of the books that they bring to me, because I just cannot keep up with everything I've got going on. I'm not reading the entire best-selling list of YA titles. So I brought a prop to show you a book. So let's say a kid brings a book that I haven't read, and I have not yet read Miss Peregrine's. I know, like, what's wrong with me? It looks great. Okay, so the tragic irony of my life is that I'm an English teacher who doesn't read that much anymore, because the only time I feel like I have to read are tiny pockets of my day or at night when I'm going to bed. And I will get like 2 paragraphs into a book and I'm asleep like every single night. Bam, I'm out. So how do I book talk a book I haven't read? Well, I do a couple things. First up, like, let's say the kid comes up and hands me the book. They have to have the book with them when they do the book talk. I have to be able to see the books because I'm writing down the page count, which I keep on a tally. I will link all of my forms. They're free, by the way, in my TPT store, but I have a form that looks like this, and I keep it for each kid. And on here, I'll label out how many pages, because that determines the grade they get. It's sort of a sliding scale based on how many pages they report. For my regular kids to get an A every 9 weeks, they have to successfully book talk 250 pages with me. For my honors classes, on years I teach honors, which I do not have honors right now, it would be 500 pages. So this book, as I'm looking at the back, has some photographs in it, so it would count for a little bit less. Why am I not finding it? So it looks like this book is 352 pages. There's some endnotes and stuff. So If this kid can successfully convince me that he's read the book, he'll get 352 pages. In a regular class, that would be an A plus, and he'd have spillover of 102 pages into second quarter. In an honors class, he'd still need to read another 150-page book or so to report to me for this first 9 weeks. So the kid hands me the book, and I say, I'm just going to say the kid's name is Paul. Why not? Okay, so hey, Paul, go ahead and tell me about the book. So Paul hands me the book, and he starts telling me about the plot. And while he's doing that, I'm reading the back page notes here just to get like a familiarity with what it's about. And it also tells me like the main character's name is Jacob, so I'll be able to speak intelligently about that. So while Paul is telling me about the plot of the book, I'm listening and reading at the same time. It's a skill. You'll get better at it the more you do it. And I'll be like, okay, that sounds great. And then I'll just stop him randomly. He'll be like raring to go, and I'll be like, okay, that's good. And so then I'll be like, oh, I see there's a photo in this one. I'll be like, tell me who is this? And be like, oh, that's Miss Peregrine. And then he'll like keep telling me about her and all that kind of stuff. And he'll just keep going. And then I'm looking through here and I'm just seeing if what he's talking about jives with what I'm reading. Sometimes I'll find an interesting passage. I'll just open the book randomly. And if I see a name, like the name Emma is on this page a bunch, and there she is again later in the book. So Emma clearly is an important character. So I'll stop Paul and I'll be like, okay, so Paul, tell me about Emma. Who is she? What's she like? And then he needs to be able to speak intelligently about Emma. And I can read along and sort of see like what's her attitude? Like how does she say things? What's she doing? To get a sense of if he's right or wrong. Then, if he's kind of trucking along and doing good, I'll just stop and I'll read a passage. Maybe I find on the page and I read just like a little bit about what's happening. Generally, I try to find action, not dialogue. But then I say, okay, so and I read it. What happens next? And then Paul needs to be able to pick it up. And while he's talking, I'm kind of cruising through here, scanning to see if he's right, to see if he's like making up stuff. You could. Sometimes what happens is kids are nervous and they just forget. Or sometimes they read the book like a month ago and they don't remember details. Or sometimes they're lying and they didn't finish the book. And so what I'll do is I'll tell them, Paul, either I'm loving it, Paul, great, full points. Or if I'm not sure, I'll say, Paul, I'm convinced that you gave it a go, but I'm unconvinced that you know it enough to earn these pages. So on the form, Paul, I'm going to write unconvinced next to this title. Take the book back and you can review it tonight, take a couple of nights, but bring it back. And then Paul is welcome to try day after day after day if he needs to. Some of my lower level kids or kids with memory issues, I encourage them to bring up a Post-it note. I say, put a Post-it note on the inside of the book, and as you're reading, write down important characters' names or important things you want to remember or talk about. And then I let them use their Post-it notes when they're doing their book talks with me. So as long as a kid is book talking before their deadline day, they can always try again the next day to get their pages. And so that's the saving grace of do it early, kids. Don't wait till deadline day. If the kid waits till deadline day and I'm unconvinced, and on deadline day, it's a little harder to convince me because I'm thinking that you rushed, you didn't finish it, you were just on deadline. Then they can try it again the next day, but it counts for the next quarter's page count. So there's a glitch there. So you have to be careful with that. So that's what the book talk looks like. I printed up I have these forms, which are the explainer forms, which has lots of like bits and pieces about it. For me, the books need to be fiction or narrative nonfiction. Like memoir is okay because it has sort of a plot line, but pure nonfiction books are really hard to book talk because there's so many details that it's kind of unfair to ask the kid to remember. Last year I had a kid, he was all about World War II and specifically World War II tanks. And every book he wanted to read was about World War II tanks. And I was like, we need to find a fiction book or some kind of narrative because otherwise it was like reading an encyclopedia. So I got him some Tim O'Brien, and it was more Vietnam than World War II, but we got him through the year. So that was something. Okay. I guess that's all my notes because I write myself notes to remember. I guess the last thing I just want to say is that I really like book talks because it's a one-on-one time for me to spend with each kid. I'd say each book talk takes 3 minutes, maybe 3 to 5 minutes with each kid. And I found that there's some kids that if I don't have book talks, I won't ever have 3 to 5 minutes where I just sit down and talk to them. And sometimes we start talking about other things too. Like we've done the book talk, I'm convinced, but this kid's here and I wanted to ask about some comment he said in class, or I'd overheard that she was competing in like this music competition thing, and I want to ask her about that. So it's a nice way to build community and to give each kid a little slice of one-on-one time with me. So I would encourage you to give book talks a try. Plus, at the end of the 9 weeks, grading is super easy. All the grading's done. I just enter the points that the kids earned on their pages, do a little math to figure out their rollover pages, how they've set themselves up for the next 9 weeks, and I'm good to go. I put those grades in and I'm going. I'm not grading and editing book reports at the end of the 9 weeks when I've got a million other things to take care of. So that's my 2 cents or 15 minutes or so on SSR. If you have specific questions, more questions about SSR, how I do it, why, what would you do in this situation, leave a comment below and I'll respond. And also other folks, how do you use SSR? What's working for you in your classroom? What advice would you give to new teachers? Yay or nay, SSR. Let's give it a big thumbs up. All right, that's it for this week. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.